All right, Sagar, what's on your radar?
Well, one of the most outrageous things I've ever seen occur in media happened yesterday when ABC News suspended veteran Washington correspondent David Wright for comments that he made while secretly recorded by Project Veritas. His crime? Well, Wright apparently said, quote, "I would consider myself a socialist. Like, I think there should be national health insurance. I'm totally fine with reining in corporations. I think there are too many billionaires, and I think there's a wealth gap." Wright was also caught saying the network does not give Trump enough credit when he does something good, and that his network is not interested in voters because, quote, "commercial imperative is incompatible with news." Perhaps his biggest crime of all was that he mentioned how his news network has become a promotional channel for its parent company, the Walt Disney Corporation. Now, color me shocked. Conservatives have always known there are probably some socialists who work in media. That's nothing new. As far as what he said about corporate media not being responsive to the wants and needs of the voters, I mean, that's basically conventional wisdom at this point. And so is talking about the obvious conflicts of interest of having massive multi-billion-dollar corporations own news networks. Worse, not only is David Wright being suspended for saying something completely true and privately voicing his opinion, ABC announced that they would reassign him to non-political coverage when he was back on duty to avoid the appearance of bias in this coverage. This is patently insane when you consider this is the same news organization which was caught by Project Veritas also saying this.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton. We had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing it up. Hey, yep. Brad Edwards, the attorney, 3 years ago, saying there will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. And I had it all 3 years ago.
How many people got suspended because of that video? Well, I'll tell you the answer. It's none. Amy Robach continues to work at the network. The only time she's ever addressed that video is with a hostage statement about how she misspoke in a moment of passion, and the story was not yet ready for air. How many executives who made the call to protect Epstein have been suspended? You all know the answer to that. Has anyone paid for ABC News cover-up of Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew's alleged perversions? Yes, actually. Her name is Ashley Bianco. She's a young staffer who clipped Amy Robach admitting the Epstein cover-up on tape, swears she didn't leak it, and happily left for another job at CBS News. Just a few days into her new gig at CBS, she was summarily fired at the request of ABC. Here's her story.
And I just, I wasn't even given the professional courtesy to defend myself. I didn't know what I'd been accused of. It was, humiliating. It was devastating.
Have you ever spoken to James O'Keefe of Project Veritas?
No, never. I didn't even know who he was until this week.
And hadn't communicated with anybody who works there in any way, shape, or form?
No, I've never communicated with anyone over there.
In what possible world is it just? Ashley Bianco, she's out of a job, while the executive who quashed the Epstein story at ABC is still walking around cashing checks. It is a complete disgrace. David Wright is being suspended for one reason only. He dared call out the Disney Leviathan and suggest, even in the meekest possible terms, that there's a connection between ownership by a $100 billion corporation and the coverage that a news organization ends up espousing. It's a basic and obvious fact to anyone with even a functioning frontal cortex, as I like to say, but for saying the quiet part out loud, he must be sacrificed. If they can suspend you for caring about wealth inequality and corporatism, they can fire you for being pro-Trump, pro-Sanders, pro-anybody who is a threat to a corporation's economic and financial interests. It's a disgraceful decision, and David Wright deserves much better than this. And Crystal, you see those clips of a young staffer, Ashley Bianco, crying, of these ABC Epstein, executives all walking around, and David Wright takes the heat because he happens to personally be a socialist. I don't care if he's a socialist personally, right? Yeah. I actually have watched him for a long time. He's a completely fair guy.
How does it affect your job? It's insane. It's completely insane. The Ashley Bianco thing makes me so mad that she wasn't even at the same news organization, and they put pressure on them to fire her because you cannot undermine their veneer of their journalistic objectivity. You're exactly right. Look, in part, they hate the views of David Wright, that he expressed being a socialist, believing in national health insurance, et cetera. They wouldn't have nearly the problem if he'd said, I'm a capitalist in my bones and I love the free markets or whatever. That would not have been an issue. But the real way that he crossed the line was by talking about how their ownership and their capitalistic bottom line affects everything that they do. And what's ironic is that by firing him,
suspending him,
yes, and taking him off political coverage,
which is insane.
Yeah, which is insane. That by doing that, they only prove the point. They only prove his point. And let's remember, he was not blasting this out to be. He didn't know that he was being recorded. This was all in a complete private moment. People are allowed to hold political views.
Yes.
They're allowed to criticize their company, right? That's a normal thing that workers do. It's completely insane to me that this has happened.
It really makes me mad because, again, if this is the justification, political, but what can they do to you? What can they suspend you for? And then it becomes the double standard of it when they start suspending you for being a socialist, or maybe they suspend you for being pro-life or being for pro-Trump or whatever. Then the bias that they do protect, the corporatist bias of centrism that all of the other people who work there that they don't fire you for, they just affirm what we all say about them, is that they are pro-corporate media, unresponsive to the needs and wants of the voters, as David Wright himself properly identified. Everybody knows that when a $200 billion corporation, they have a $200 billion market cap, owns a news organization that is going to affect their coverage. Every single person who's ever worked anywhere is ownership affects the way that something works. That's it. And yet, for saying that, even saying it out loud, he gets suspended. That's the crazy part. This is deeply troublesome.
Deeply troublesome. And, I think you also have to think about the fact that what do these news organizations claim to hold as their central value, as a central thing that they're upholding? Freedom of speech. And you're not allowed to express privately a political view or a view of your company in the way that the market dictates some of the coverage that they put forward. And then in order to quash that, you just completely prove the point.
Well, I'm speaking up for David Wright because it's exactly, that's what you're saying. It's about if they begin to set these standards in order that David Wright can be fired, while in Epstein, the people who actually covered up for Jeffrey Epstein walk around free, and the only person who's punished in the entire thing is the low-level staffer who clipped that segment of Amy Robach talking in the internal system and never even did anything with it, didn't leak it, whatever, is fired. This is unjust.
Well, and think about the broader context here if we zoom out, right? These news organizations, they paint themselves as victims. Oh, we're under threat. Oh, the president's crying about fake news, which, look, first of all, I think the president does go way too far with that stuff, and it is damaging. But they never do any self-reflection about why is it that we lost the trust of so many people? Why is it that they don't see us as fair? Why is it that they're gravitating towards alternative media sources and to Twitter and to YouTube and independent creators? Oh, maybe it's because of incidents like this. Maybe it's because we were wrong about the Iraq War and cheerleaded the nation into that. Maybe it's because we were wrong about the financial crisis. Maybe it's because we were wrong about Russiagate and led you all down a garden path expecting this major reveal of P-tapes and direct phone calls between Putin and Trump or whatever. None of that ever happens. It's blame the public, blame the stupid voters and the stupid public, and blame, one demagogue rather than ever understand that the only way that that kind of rhetoric has power is when it has a grain of truth.
Yeah.
But they never want to think about that.
No, they don't. And the other thing is, to my friends on the right who get mad at me whenever I talk about things like this is the perfect illustration of how corporate power it can be just as much, if not more, of a threat to not your free speech, to your free liberties, to all the things that we care about as a country, than government power. The government didn't have anything to do with this.
Right.
This is about a $200 billion corporation using its tentacles and its ownership and all of that in order to silence a viewpoint, which is a direct threat to their business. If you're okay with that,
Well, and it's a feedback loop because they gain power, they influence the government sets up a landscape where they gain more power, and around you go. Next up on Rising, the Texas Democratic Party's executive director describes how that state is preparing for Super Tuesday.